Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today's video idea comes from a tweet I saw by Jenny Nicholson. This fellow YouTuber and movie lover usually has some pretty fun and interesting videos, mainly about Star Wars and other big budget blockbuster movies, but unfortunately, Jenny also seems to be more and more left-leaning every day. Not surprising coming from a Californian who has probably never moved out of her parents' house. Regardless, here's the tweet in question. It says, "This is a good video with a lot of stuff I didn't know about Corpse Bride or Miss Peregrine," followed by a link to a video that's called Jewish Erasure in Tim Burton Films. Yikes. Don't worry though, I already promptly responded to this, telling Jenny on Twitter that she didn't know this stuff because it's not true. Jewish erasure is obviously a bogus, made-up, social justice warrior term. It's their way of crying about not having enough minorities in Hollywood films. We actually went over a video with a similar premise by MTV Decoded a few weeks back, where they complained about Asian erasure, and really all it amounted to was a misunderstanding of Hollywood and a need for the SJW minorities to see more of their people on the screens. How shallow. But now, with all that said, let's go ahead and take a look at this video linked here and see what's going on.
As much as Christopher Lee playing a stern, withholding, and kind of duplicitous authority figure hits all the right buttons, I still very easily could have gotten my fix had he been a rabbi and not a priest.
I seriously don't think this girl could look any more smug if she tried. Damn, the entitlement is strong in this one. Yeah, sure, this movie could have been the same if he was a rabbi, a monk, or a Buddhist, or whatever. But the real question here is, why are you watching movies and hoping that the people from a certain religion are in them? Echoes. And to a worse extent, why are you making videos with made-up terms like Jewish erasure too? What an SJW loser.
It's a good time to have the following disclaimer for the next few videos. We are aware of the possibility that Tim Burton might be neurodivergent or disabled. If he is, he has never been public about it, and he's under no obligation to be, but it also means he does not want us to look at him or his work with that lens. So we are not going to do that work for him.
Sounds like this part is a bit of a trigger warning to me. SJW confirmed. I don't know what the deal with neurodivergent is, but I do know that leftists love to parade around their flaws and disabilities, like they're badges of honor. And in turn, if this is true about Tim Burton, he's the one actually being a man and doing the right thing. No reason to show off your possible disabilities. Where I come from, we would do the same thing too. You keep that shit to yourself and deal with those problems with your own family, friends, and doctors.
In 2016, I made a video about Burton's comments on the racial disparity in his films, and someone left a comment about how Corpse Bride was actually based on a Jewish fairy tale. You might be surprised to learn that if you've seen the film, because while there is religion in it, Judaism is not. That comment has stuck with me. But substantiating that claim turned out to be a lot more difficult than I thought it would be.
Well, if it is really difficult to find out if Tim Burton based his movie on a Jewish story, then maybe that's not true. I would say certainly it's not true if it's really that hard to find a source for it. Sounds to me like you want it to be true, so you're going out and you're not going to stop until you find some way to confirm your bias. And that, my friends, is basically the definition of confirmation bias. Going out looking for information to support beliefs you already have. Not to mention, even if this movie was based on an old Jewish tale, that doesn't mean Tim Burton erased the Jews from this movie, like what your video's title implies. Even if this is true, all it means is that Tim Burton adapted the story in a different way, kind of like how Shakespeare's plays have been adapted in many different ways over generations. Sometimes they are set in the present instead of the Middle Ages, and sometimes they take a play and reverse the genders, or they make the lovers gay or something else different like that. Lots of fun ways you can interpret these works, much like how Tim Burton interpreted this folk tale. And one thing these adaptations are not doing is erasing the original work. No one would say the all-black adaptation of Othello was erasing whites from Hollywood, so they should not say that a Christian adaptation of a Jewish story, like possibly what happened with The Corpse Bride, well, that's not erasing Jews either.
Despite the vast amount of research that I did on this film, I wasn't able to find a definitive answer. There were some references to a Jewish story, but many, many more referred to a 19th century Russian folktale. I did some digging and discovered that this 19th century Russian folktale seems to have first appeared on the internet in 2004 on a fan site called the Tim Burton Collective.
Man, I love wannabe big brain lefties that brag about doing all this supposed research, which really amounts to them Googling stuff on a laptop until they find the information that confirms their bias. This girl is clearly looking for a way to prove Tim Burton's The Corpse Bride was based on a Jewish Jewish story. Who knows why she wants to reach this goal, but it's certainly not for the sake of information and finding out what's true here. She's not the innocent fact finder she portrays herself to be. Most likely she wants this to be a Jewish story because she is Jewish herself, or at least some of her friends are, which is just like what happened in that MTV video I mentioned before, where they wanted everything in Hollywood to be Asian because one of the presenters was Asian themselves, and she was friends with the head host, Francesca Ramsey. Social justice warriors really are this shallow and self-centered, so make no mistake. If you want further proof of this, look at this next clip from the video. Not only is this chick trying her hardest to find a Jewish source for this, she's also doing all she can to discredit anything that says otherwise.
It doesn't quite read like a folktale usually does, and conveniently, there's no author, manuscript, or source of any kind included. My guess is that one of the moderators wrote it to generate traffic to their site, and clearly it worked.
My guess is you don't want to believe it, because you're biased against it. Sources is another lefty weasel word they use to try and sound smart too. First they pretend anything without a source is wrong, which is not true. You can be right without sources, of course. And then she will of course use her own sources to try and claim that she is right, even though those sources could be utter bullshit, lies, or just plain wrong themselves. So despite what these feminist studies majors would have you believe, sources don't make you right. As we went over before, people like this will just keep searching online until they find an article that agrees with them anyway. And regardless of that website's credibility, they think putting a link to it beneath their video makes them right about everything, when it really doesn't. Not to mention, YouTube videos and blogs about movies, they don't require sources to begin with. We're not writing scientific papers on quantum theory here. We're talking about old movies by Tim Burton, lady. So relax a little bit. And I love Tim as much as the next guy, but damn, these feminists love to dive into this stuff like they're saving lives or something, like they're trying to cure cancer. It just goes to show how important movies and pop culture are to weak-willed, simple-minded, shallow and ditzy SJWs like the ones in this video.
The other theory is that the story in question is a 16th century Jewish tale called The Finger, and possibly a German tale called The Demon in the Tree, which has a similar theme and is also from the 16th century. I guess this theme was quite popular then. Both appear in a collection of Jewish folk tales selected, translated, and retold by folklorist Howard Schwartz. I'd definitely recommend picking up one of his books if you can.
I get it. You want people to think you're smart because you read lots of old books. You're some kind of pseudo-intellectual who thinks she's right about everything because you took a women's studies course on film at some community college like 8 years ago. And, well, I hate to break it to you guys, but usually the people who want to appear smart and sophisticated like this, they are usually quite the opposite. Really, what I see here is a weak little girl who spends way too much time analyzing animated movies from over a decade ago. Shouldn't be surprised though, since social justice warriors do tend to be very obsessed with pop culture. Namely, they want to take over any popular space they can, so they can use them to push their own failed progressive ideologies. This is basically the same shit Anita Sarkeesian was doing 3 years ago, and she still does. But thankfully, Anita fell off into obscurity, but it looks like this Jewish erasure channel is trying to step in and fill that void with more SJW nonsense. By the way, this channel is called Princess and the Scrivener, and guess what? They want to be the next Sarkeesian effect so bad, they even got the same little creepy artwork done for them, just like how Anita did. And just like with Anita's pictures, these look nothing like the original people.
Sometime during this project, Rampt read a folktale about a man who accidentally marries a corpse, and knowing that Burton was thinking about his next stop-motion project, he thought this macabre story would perfectly suit his friend's sensibilities. We don't know for certain if the story that Rampt read was from Lilith's Cave, but given that he was a story guy working for Disney, who mines fairy tales and folk tales regularly for inspiration, I don't think it's an unlikely scenario.
Well, I gotta say, your case is looking pretty damn weak so far. You've got no proof that Tim Burton used inspiration from a Jewish story at all. Tim has definitely not said this himself, so all you've got so far is one of his artists might have read a Jewish folktale, maybe. And that's a whole lot of assuming in order to get you all the way there. All the way from that tale into this movie. But hey, don't take my word for it. The next clip from this video goes over what Tim Burton himself actually had to say.
Joe had heard a little story, like a paragraph, which was an excerpt from an old fable. I don't even know what country it came. My recollection is that it didn't have a specific place of origin. I wasn't really interested in what the real ethnic origins of the tale were, because the thing that got me was the fable aspect of it.
Sounds pretty legit to me. Burton heard a bit of a story, not knowing or caring where it was from, and, well, he ran away with it and made it into his own movie and tale. No problems here, but this Sarah the Scrivener girl who is hosting the video, she's clearly none too pleased.
Something to know about Tim Burton is that he is low-key, anti-intellectual, and not great with words. His interviews don't read very well because he stutters, starts new sentences in the middle of others, and loses his train of thought.
So what? The guy is a storytelling genius too. He's a modern-day film auteur who can convey more with a few seconds of film than this girl can in hours and hours of her ranting and her well-rehearsed and over-enunciated sentences and videos. She better be joking if she thinks she's above Tim Burton in any way, shape, or form. This guy directed the first Batman movie in 1989, before there was even any kind of Marvel or DC extended universes. Not to mention, Tim Burton also directed Edward Scissorhands, and he was the head producer on A Nightmare Before Christmas. Oh, and Tim, he also made Alice in Wonderland for Disney, which earned them billions of dollars. So, with that said, frankly, I don't care if the guy stutters or changes his sentences once in a while. And as far as being low-key anti-intellectual, well, that's bullshit too. Just because he's not some wannabe smart girl with a laundry list of fake sources doesn't mean Tim is anti-intellectual. He's smarter than her and me and all the rest of us. Anyone watching this video, Burton just doesn't feel the need to act smart and pompous and pretentious, which is what this social justice warrior is doing in the video to a T.
Like, you couldn't possibly comprehend a story if it was tainted by the details of an experience that wasn't your own. It's a very unimaginative mindset for a filmmaker, and a rather xenophobic and racist one when you specifically aren't interested in origins that are quote-unquote ethnic.
Oh, now Tim is xenophobic and racist? Wow, this chick really jumped the shark early on this one. We're only halfway through this video and she's already shown her bias, proven nothing, and slung around some of the worst, most overused SJW attack words known to man. Listen, not identifying the origin of a part of some story Tim Burton heard in passing is not a crime, and it's certainly not him being biased against outsiders or other races, which is what those terms imply. Really, what's going on here is Sarah the Scrivener, the host of this video, she doesn't understand storytelling and movie making, and she's trying to push her own agenda into this film. I'm still not sure if she's Jewish, maybe not, but she's sure trying to stand up for them. Protecting minorities is a favorite pastime for SJWs after all, even though most of their actions don't really protect or help anyone. Proving the Corpse Bride was inspired by a Jewish folktale really changes nothing either. I don't even think she really proved that, but even if she did, all it says is that she's a nerd who has way too much time on her hands, and it certainly doesn't prove Tim Burton is offensive, and there's definitely no Jewish erasure going on here either. You can't erase Jews from Tim Burton's movie if they were never there to begin with. He himself even said they weren't inspired by a Jewish story. He had a small inkling of a tale which he expanded on his own. So as far as I'm concerned, the whole premise here is hogwash. Jewish erasure is not a thing, and it's certainly not happening here in the slightest.
Tim gravitates towards universal fairy tale qualities in his films.
But if you read The Finger, most of it is universal. Yes, there's Hebrew and rabbis, but those are details. Gentiles can easily read the story and totally understand it because the fear of big life changes like marriage and death are what's at the heart of the story, not something that is unique to a Jewish identity.
Well, Burton also set his movie in Victorian England, where most people were Christian, hence the priest instead of the rabbi. Jews were a very small minority back then, as they are now. So I think if Tim is going to try and appeal to a wider audience, clearly having Christian themes would play better to the bigger crowds. Not to say American audiences would reject a Jewish story, not at all. We've all seen Seinfeld, but it does make sense when you think about it without any SJW bias. Next, Sarah the Scrivener here finishes her video talking about another Tim Burton film, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
The book it's based on by Ransom Riggs is also set in Wales, but it's also Jewish. Jake, the main character, and his parents don't seem to be religious, but Jake's grandfather is Jewish. And it's a detail that's important because it enriches the story overall. I'm sure it's not a coincidence that the name of the villains bear a striking resemblance to the word Holocaust. It doesn't get brought up a whole lot, but the story wouldn't be as compelling without that real-life parallel.
If you say so, lady, but I'm going to go ahead and favor Tim Burton's expertise here. He knows what makes a story in a movie compelling, clearly. As for this particular movie, though, I can't speak to it specifically since I never saw it, but I will say that if Burton wanted to leave out the Jewish aspects for his movie, then that's really his artistic right. And even though I will admit this is a much better claim to some sort of Jewish erasure, I still would never call it that at all. And I wouldn't say this artistic choice was racist or offensive at all either. either. It's just a choice that Tim made when putting his film together, one which this SJW chick is butthurt about because Jews are clearly one of her pet minority groups. Leftists like this love to try and stick up for supposed underdogs. I guess it makes them feel special and virtuous. And this isn't even mentioning the fact that Jews are really overrepresented in Hollywood, if you think about it. I mean, they only make up 1% of our population, yet you can't turn on a TV, movie, or music video or comedy special without running into Jews everywhere. The writers, the actors, the singers, the agents, and directors, so many of them are Jewish. Think about it. Steven Spielberg, Andy Samberg, Max Weinberg, and that's just naming a few with Bergs in their names. But I think you get my point. In the end, this whole Jewish erasure bit in Hollywood is really just a big fat stinking lie. There's no Jewish erasure here in this video, that's for sure. The first movie was inspired by a short bit of a story that was never really cited, so even though this SJW tried to cite it herself, I would hardly take her word for it. Next, after wasting 7 minutes of our lives on that, she finally gets to an actual almost point, but I think really, Sarah the Scrivener overplayed her hand here. If she had said something more reasonable like, Tim Burton tends to not have Jews in his films, that could have maybe had some merit to it, but instead, she went with this whole dramatic, over-the-top Jewish erasure line, which is just plain bullshit. What do you guys think? Is Tim Burton racist or xenophobic? Do you think this girl in the video is really as smart as she thinks she is? And is Jewish erasure in Hollywood really an issue? Because as I said before, if you ask me, Jews are overrepresented in Hollywood, if anything. But don't just take my word for it. Comment your thoughts and everything below and we'll have a conversation in the comments section. And thanks again for watching today's video. We'll see y'all next time here on No Bullshit.